August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was found unconscious on the bathroom floor of his Graceland mansion. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, screamed for help as paramedics rushed to the scene.
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack.
But it was already too late. Elvis was gone. At just 42 years old, the biggest music icon of the 20th century had died, suddenly and without warning. But this wasn't just a tragic accident, because what the toxicology report later revealed was disturbing. Elvis had over 10,000 doses of prescription medication in his system during the final months of his life. Painkillers, sedatives, amphetamines, a deadly cocktail that had been prescribed by one doctor. So, who was this doctor? And why was Elvis being prescribed enough medication to sedate an entire hospital ward? By the end of this video, you'll understand not only how Elvis Presley's death unfolded, but also why this case still haunts the medical community today. This is the true story of Dr. George Nichopoulos, the man accused of killing the king of rock and roll.
Are you ready?
No, but we'll try anyway.
He's really nervous. He's sweating nerves.
He knew that this could be a failure and that would be it.
Well, I'm gonna have to do it sooner or later, so might as well get on with it, baby.
Part 1. Elvis and Dr. Nick. Born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1935, Elvis changed the music world forever with his deep, soulful voice and electrifying stage presence. By the mid-1950s, he had already earned the title of the King of Rock and Roll. Songs like Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, and Love Me Tender dominated the charts. His hip-shaking performances sparked both adoration and controversy, but there was no denying his influence. By the late 1960s, Elvis had already conquered music, film, and television. But behind the fame and fortune, Elvis was struggling. Years of intense touring, exhausting performance schedules, and the pressure of maintaining his image were taking a toll on his body and mind. He suffered from chronic insomnia, intense body pain, and severe anxiety. That's when Dr. Nick entered the picture. Elvis first met Dr. Nick in 1967 when the singer was complaining of saddle pain while riding horses at Graceland. Dr. Nick prescribed him mild pain relief and muscle relaxers, and from that moment, he became Elvis's trusted physician. By 1970, Dr. Nick had become Elvis's full-time doctor. He was on call 24/7, traveling with Elvis on tour, attending private events, and even staying at Graceland for extended periods. Dr. Nick wasn't just a doctor. He became part of Elvis's inner circle, and with that closeness came dangerous access. Elvis began relying on medications not just for physical pain, but for emotional stability. He used amphetamines to stay awake for performances, sedatives to sleep, and opioids to manage pain. Whenever he needed something, Dr. Nick was there to provide it. According to reports, Elvis would wake up at all hours of the night demanding medication. Dr. Nick almost never said no. He justified it by saying that Elvis was under immense pressure and needed help to keep going. But even close friends started noticing the red flags. Members of the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's close group of friends and bodyguards, recalled how Elvis would sometimes forget song lyrics on stage, seem disoriented during interviews, and struggle with his speech. His health was clearly declining, but Dr. Nick kept writing prescriptions. It's what Elvis wanted, Dr. Nick would later claim. But was Dr. Nick really trying to help, or was he enabling one of the greatest stars of all time to spiral out of control? Because by the final year of Elvis's life, the amount of medication Dr. Nick was giving him reached disturbing levels. Part 2. The Prescription Pattern. By the early 1970s, Elvis's health was getting worse, and so was his dependency on medication. Dr. Nick had become Elvis's full-time physician, and he was prescribing Elvis an alarming amount of drugs. In the last year of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick prescribed him over 10,000 doses of medication. That's about 25 pills a day. These weren't just mild painkillers. They included amphetamines to keep him awake, sedatives to help him sleep, and opioids for pain. Elvis also took hormones to help with his energy and mood swings. Elvis had real health problems, including high blood pressure, glaucoma, and digestive issues. But the sheer volume of medication went way beyond normal treatment. Some of the drugs Elvis was taking shouldn't have been mixed, but Dr. Nick kept writing prescriptions. Elvis's inner circle started to notice the changes. Elvis would sometimes slur his words or seem completely out of it during conversations. He would even fall asleep mid-sentence. His stage performances were also suffering. He sometimes forgot lyrics or looked visibly disoriented on stage. Despite all this, Dr. Nick kept supplying the drugs. Some people close to Elvis believed Dr. Nick was more concerned with keeping Elvis happy than actually helping him. Elvis trusted Dr. Nick completely, but that trust was costing him his health. Part 3. The Final Years. By 1976, Elvis's physical and mental health had taken a serious downturn. His weight had ballooned to over 350 pounds, and his behavior had become unpredictable. He would sometimes ramble incoherently or lash out at those around him. There were signs that things were getting worse. Elvis's ex-wife, Priscilla Presley, and some close friends tried to stage an intervention. They begged Elvis to get help, but Dr. Nick insisted that Elvis needed the medication to manage his health issues. Elvis refused to believe that the drugs were the problem. Despite his health issues, Elvis kept performing. In 1976, he performed over 120 shows, many of them while heavily medicated. Footage from this time shows Elvis sweating heavily, struggling to keep up with the music, and visibly dazed. In the last 7 months of his life, Dr. Nick prescribed Elvis more than 19,000 pills, including painkillers, sleeping pills, and stimulants. Elvis's body was breaking down, but Dr. Nick kept writing the prescriptions. And on August 16, 1977, it all came to a tragic end. Part 4. The Last Day. August 16, 1977. Elvis's final day started like so many others in the last year of his life. He was restless and unable to sleep. In the early hours of the morning, Elvis took several pills prescribed by Dr. Nick, a mix of painkillers, sleeping aids, and sedatives. At around 9:30 a.m., Elvis told his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, that he was going to the bathroom. He had trouble sleeping, so this wasn't unusual. Hours passed, but Elvis never came out. At 2 p.m., Ginger found him lying face down on the bathroom floor, completely unresponsive. She screamed for help as staff rushed to the scene. Paramedics arrived shortly after and attempted to revive him, but it was too late. Elvis was rushed to the Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, but at 3:30 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was only 42 years old. The official cause of death was initially listed as cardiac arrhythmia, but when the toxicology report came back, the truth was much darker. Elvis had high levels of codeine, Valium, Demerol, Percodan, and other medications in his system. The cocktail of drugs had slowed his heart rate and breathing until his body shut down completely. Dr. Nick was there at the hospital. He denied any wrongdoing, claiming that the medications were necessary to treat Elvis's chronic health problems. But as more details emerged, it became clear that Dr. Nick had been prescribing an astonishing amount of medication, more than enough to kill even a healthy person. And when the truth came out, Dr. Nick would face serious consequences. Part 5. The Aftermath. Elvis's death shocked the world. Fans gathered outside Graceland in mourning, and the news dominated headlines for days. But while the public grieved, the authorities were already looking for answers. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners quickly launched an investigation into Dr. Nick's prescribing habits. The numbers were staggering. Over 10,000 doses of medication prescribed to Elvis in just the last year, and over 19,000 pills in the final 7 months of his life. In 1980, Dr. Nick was charged with overprescribing controlled substances, not just to Elvis but to other high-profile clients as well. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Dr. Nick had prescribed over 12,000 pills to Elvis in the last year of his life alone. Dr. Nick's defense argued that Elvis suffered from serious medical issues and that the medications were necessary to manage his pain and insomnia. The jury ultimately acquitted Dr. Nick of criminal charges, but his reputation was destroyed. In 1995, after years of controversy and additional complaints, the Tennessee Medical Board revoked Dr. Nick's medical license, citing unethical prescribing practices. Dr. Nick maintained that he had only been trying to help Elvis. In interviews, he insisted that the medications were necessary to manage Elvis's health problems, but many believed that Dr. Nick had enabled Elvis's addiction, leading to his early death. But the ethical questions surrounding this case still remain unanswered. Part 6. The Ethical Questions. The case of Elvis and Dr. Nick raises profound ethical questions that persist in medicine today. Did Elvis's fame protect Dr. Nick from consequences? Evidence suggests yes. Dr. Nick continued practicing for 18 years after Elvis died, despite the investigation into his prescribing practices beginning almost immediately. Medical ethicist Dr. Arthur Kaplan explains, "This is classic VIP syndrome, when doctors abandon standard practices to please famous patients. This syndrome places the patient's demands above their medical needs. When Elvis wanted pills, Dr. Nick provided them, prioritizing Elvis's requests over his health. But questions of responsibility extend to Elvis himself. As an adult with agency, wasn't he partly responsible for his own demise?" Addiction specialist Dr. Drew Pinsky. "Addiction is complex. While patients have autonomy, their decision-making becomes impaired. Physicians have an ethical obligation to recognize this and intervene, even when it's uncomfortable. The pattern continues today. Michael Jackson died under similar circumstances in 2009, with his doctor Conrad Murray providing the surgical anesthetic propofol as a sleep aid. Prince's 2016 death from fentanyl follows the same tragic template, a talented artist with access to prescription medications that ultimately proved fatal. These cases reveal a disturbing truth. When fame, money, and addiction intersect, the normal guardrails of medical ethics can fall away. In the end, Elvis's death raised more questions than answers. Was he a victim of his own lifestyle, or a victim of reckless medical care? The truth, as with many tragedies, lies somewhere in between.